pure torture. You couldn't imagine. Well, the day at the funeral, actually at the viewing, we were there with the guys, and I remember his wife, Bridget, saying something to me that resonated. Because I didn't know Scott as a Scott. I knew Scott as a deputy, but not Scott as a person, per se. Because in our jobs, we don't really have time to talk too much about our personal matters, and we just go out there and do a job. Mm-hmm. And she said to me, "Do you know God? Or do you know Jesus?" At the viewing, she says, "Do you know Jesus? Scott would have wanted you to know him." That was loud.
Mm-hmm.
That was the 2x4 on my head.
That came just in time, too, brother, because Satan's best weapon is condemnation.
Oh,
and I'm sure you
experienced it,
yeah.
Even after that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It was the worst. The worst feeling, but when she said that, I was like, wow. I went to church. It was on a Saturday. Went to church on a Sunday. And I broke down. I sobbed like a baby in church with my wife holding me. And I remember thinking, how am I going to get through this? God, how am I going to go through this and get through this? I keep thinking about this, and I keep thinking about how I could have saved them. I keep thinking, 1,000 thoughts going through my head. And I don't know, I'm thinking to myself even, is this what I'm cut out to do? Am I supposed to be here as far as doing this job?
That's the other voice.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. That's the other voice. So I remember that Monday, right after I went to church Sunday, I was due for my psychological exam. And I'm thinking to myself, how am I going to make this? She's going to talk to me and she's going to think I'm crazy. I'm absolutely crazy. She's probably not even going to send me back to work. And I remember being a wreck. And something says, go to church. So I called my pastor up, Daryl Morgan. And I go, hey, you have time for me? You have time for a minute? I need to see you before I go to this psychological. He goes, sure, come on in. So I'm sitting there in his office, and I'm a wreck, and I'm telling him, I don't know how I'm going to get through this. So there goes the question again that's I've been thinking about, which is, do you know Jesus? He asked me that. Where are you with Jesus? Where do you stand with Jesus? Do you know Jesus? Have you asked Jesus to come into your life? And I look at him and I go, no, I never have. He goes, well, we're going to ask him today to come into your life. And we pray. And I ask Jesus to come into my life. I don't know how this happened, but I felt, and I know it's something that's unexplainable, I felt an inner peace as soon as I did that. It was like all my worries were wiped away. It was an inner peace that I couldn't explain. And I was like, wow. Half an hour later, I find myself at the psychologist's office, just doing my psychological exam. I remember being calm, and she goes, seems like you're dealing with this pretty good. And I was like, yes, I am. Turns out that I end up talking to her, and she ends up telling me her problems. She ends up telling me, "Where do you go to church?" And I am shocked, because here's this professional who I thought 2 hours ago would have probably called me crazy, and now I seem like I'm the same one.
Mm-hmm.
It's incredible. I was shocked. Well, at that point, I kind of walked out of there saying, "Okay, well, God, you're there for me, and I know." So I went and continued going to church. I continued praying. And one day my pastor, I think it's like 2 or 3 weeks after, goes, "Hey, this lady wants you to go to a luncheon." He mentions her name. It's a married gangster. And I go, "Why does she want me to go to luncheon?" "Well, she's insisting you go to this luncheon." And I'm like, "Okay, well, we'll see." I kind of brush it off. Well, a week later, I'm back at church, and this is during the week. She goes, "Hey, Mary called again. She wants you to go. Matter of fact, I have her on the phone. You want to talk to her?" And I talked to her, and she is so joyous, and she's so happy to talk to me. And I couldn't believe it. I was looking at the phone like, she doesn't even know me. But she's completely and she's fighting for me to go to this luncheon. So I ended up going to this luncheon that was, at the time, OS 91, Operation Safety 91. They were, it was a tribute to the military. And I'm sitting there thinking, what kind of stuff is going to go on? This is before I walk into the luncheon. What are they going to talk about? So when I get in there, they start talking about Psalm 91.
Mm-hmm.
And I see people, I mean, for me, very respected people in the military going up there and giving their testimony. One of them being Colonel Danny McKnight, who's a national spokesman. And he and the others, I mean, what I heard that day changed my life, which was using, prayer for protection. So after I left there, I began using Psalm 91 as my prayer protection every day. I prayed for myself. I prayed for the guys working with me. I prayed for the families. I prayed for the innocent, the weak. I prayed that we go out there and do our job to the fullest. And I prayed for protection, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I continued using this prayer. And one day, I'm sitting at a red light, and I'm talking on the phone, and all of a sudden, I feel my phone fly out of my hand. And it was like in slow motion. I could see the phone flying. I could feel me being jolted forward. I could feel my spine crack from the very bottom of the back of my head to the base of my back. It's like a domino. And I remember seeing a big truck, an SUV behind me. And us as first responders, I think I should have stood in the car like most paramedics would have told you to do, but I didn't. I'm a first responder. I'm always worrying about the next person and not me. So I get out of the vehicle and I look behind me. Initially, when I get on the radio, I say minor damage. I don't even look at my car. I was rear-ended by a drunk driver on a Monday who was probably going about 55 plus miles an hour. And I remember dealing with her and looking back at my car going, oh, Jesus. My trunk is in my back seat. My car is total. But but I'm not hurt. My boss goes, hey, go to the hospital. Go check that. Get checked out. You may need something. I'm fine. Just go. So I'll go to the hospital, and we sit there for a couple hours. I get a CAT scan. The doctor comes back and tells me, you're fine. Nothing wrong with your back. Matter of fact, you may be sore. That's all. You're fine. And I'm like, wow. God, you really did a number today. You protected me like I couldn't even imagine. I was surprised to walk away from that.
Mm-hmm.
Completely surprised. So after dealing with that accident, I was in shock. I couldn't believe that he was there, and like I said, I kept praying. Even after that, I kept praying, and I saw it. And there were times I can use them. I used them on calls. I mean, there were times I used God on my calls, and I would go, God, protect us during this call. And he would work his magic, and at the end of the night, nobody was hurt. Well, matter of fact, I had a call the other day, which God showed his ways more than ever. And that's one thing, I guess, being a new Christian, you start learning little things, and you start standing still enough to listen to what he's telling you and his lessons. And I had a call the other night where it was a young little girl about 2 or 3 years old that was found walking on the street at 4 in the morning. And it was a fairly decent neighborhood. And she had blisters on her feet from walking. She's about 2 or 3 years old. Very limited vocabulary. You couldn't get much out of her, except for her first name and her last name, and maybe her mom's name. She gave me her mom's name. And this was a gated community, and I've seen cases like this. It didn't look like a case of neglect to me. I looked at it and I go, well, this looks like a case where a child just got curious. They probably didn't have any child safety locks or anything on the doors. And I end up talking to the little girl. She's giving me her first and last name, and I'm like, that's all we have. So I send deputies through the neighborhood to look for these open doors to see where the child could have exited. And they're not finding anything. So I go back to the guardhouse, and I start asking for folks with that similar last name, and they're not finding anything. It's 4 in the morning, and I'm thinking, wow, I'm the only supervisor there at that time, and I'm going, all right, 2 things can happen in this case. Either I call out the cavalry to look for this house that this child came from, or worse than that, I would have to turn over to DCF, the Department of Children and Families.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't a case of neglect. It's just we couldn't find the parents. So I remember after I left the guardhouse, I stopped my car on the side of the road, and I pray. I said, God, please let me find this child's parents. Me being a parent, I know that if I woke up in the middle of the night and didn't find my 16-year-old or 11-year-old in bed, I would be frantic. I could just imagine what the parent with a 3-year-old would feel like.
Mm-hmm.
So I end up talking to God, and I ask him, help me find him for a good 5 minutes. So I get back to the car, and at that point she's with another deputy, a female deputy, who kind of built up a rapport with the child. And I'm talking to the supervisor, my sergeant, and I go, we're probably going to have to call more resources in to find this child's parents, because that's all we have left. A voice in there tells me, put her in the car and drive. This is a voice inside of me. Put her in the car and drive. As soon as